Let's talk about the dark side, and specifically the dark side of Gemini. And there's a dark side to all the signs. So I don't mean to pick on Gemini. I'm picking on Gemini right now because I need to vent, because I'm in some dealings with some of these types of Geminis. And this helps me vent. This helps me come back to the real reality. So the dark side. Because this is the thing. A lot of times when you run into the dark side, let me preface this by saying, when you run into the dark side of these signs, society in general will somewhat protect the dark side of these signs, as long as they're not breaking the law. This is what the consensus does, as long as they're not breaking the law. And so the reason why all the signs can have a dark side is because we're really talking about negative and positive, or what we perceive as positive. Generally speaking, all the signs have a negative expression. We could say a negative, a neutral, and a positive, generally speaking. And this dark side of Gemini, for me, is very negative. It's something that I don't know if it's my Capricorn, Aquarius, this idealism, truth, Sagittarius that I have, that I can't stand these attributes more than anything else. So let's go over the dark side, some of the dark side of Gemini. Think of Gemini, ruled by Mercury. This is the sign of communication. And if you go around the zodiac, Gemini is the third sign in the zodiac. So you could also look at it like that. It's a young sign. It's the third youngest sign of the zodiac, behind Aries and Taurus. So if you think about it that way, and you're dealing with the archetype of Gemini as an archetype exclusively, there's no Cancer. Let's say you start in Aries, you're moving through Aries, Taurus, Gemini. There's no Cancer, Virgo, Leo, and on and on and on. You've already experienced Aries, you've experienced Taurus, and now you're moving into Gemini. So think of it in that terms as well when you're dealing with Gemini as a pure archetype. There's no experience. They tend to, this lower level, we could call lower level Gemini, younger Gemini, they just don't have the experience. It's very weird to think this is even real, but so what tends to happen is they can be perceived as liars, tricksters, superficial. And I want to focus on those three words: superficial, liars, exaggerators, and tricksters. Now, why would that be? Let's think of it in terms of the other sign that is ruled by Mercury, Virgo, which they have yet to reach. Virgo is going through this, going through these experiences of self-improvement, looking at the self, analyzing the self. What did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? They feel this, perhaps a lot of times they'll feel this constant level of guilt. Gemini doesn't have that, purely speaking. So when you run into a Gemini who is really deep in their negative expression, they do not have feelings of guilt, or their feelings of guilt are not anywhere near someone who's going to be in this Virgo space. Kind of like me, I oftentimes will be in this space, and I'll heart. So let's say you get into a kind of like a battle with somebody, and the one person is just, the Virgo person is suffering, so they can't stop thinking about it. They feel guilty, they want to fix it, etc. The Gemini person is quickly thinking about it, possibly, and then if they even are, and then they're moving on. In a sense, it comes to that Cancer thing too. They'll lack care. And this is where they'll be superficial, they'll lie, and they'll do it. You think, might think from a moral standpoint, like, well, they're immoral. Why are they doing it? That's why they're doing it, because they don't have the capacity to care. They don't have the capacity to rethink things over, to analyze things, or they just don't want to. That's it's hard to believe from my perspective, or if you're kind of like me, they don't want to do it. They want to avoid that. They want to avoid care. In it's like, if they're really in the purest form of Gemini, and you think of Gemini, short-term memory, short-term. Sometimes you think with this, you think of Gemini would have a great memory. Not necessarily. In its negative expression, it would have a short-term memory, which means going to this person who dwells on things, the kind of the opposite, the Virgo person who dwells on things. The Gemini person is not going to dwell on it. They're actually going to quickly forget about it, just by their nature. They don't even, it's not something that they have control over. They're just like, it's in, it's out. They're on to the next. Think of Gemini as being very scattered. They're on to the next thing. They might have so many things going on in their head, they're not thinking about you at all. They could care less. So these are the things that I think are some of the darkest things about Gemini. And when you think of being superficial, this ability to change face and put on different masks and be very superficial, it's very difficult. If you try to get a Gemini to come to terms with all this, and they're in this space, forget about it. They're going to be superficial. I mean, they could change like that. Think of somebody you're working with. You might see their evil side or their dark side, and then all of a sudden there's other people watching, and they're just a completely different person. And you're like, you're not the same. You're not the same person. And they'll completely deny. They can completely deny it, and put on this completely different face to protect themselves. From, again, like I said, Gemini, there's positive expression and there's negative expression. We're talking about the absolute negative expression of Gemini. Hopefully, you look at a chart, there's a blend of planets in other areas of the chart. But you might ask yourself, well, how can you tell which one's which? You really can't. You have to use your own experience. And I would say one of the signs is if they're very, very superficial and they're not willing to communicate and own up to these negative things, and they're completely denying it all the time, or they're avoiding it completely, then they're probably one of these types of Geminis. I think that's the big thing. Even just thinking of from a sense of care, if you just look at the other signs, do they really have care? And if they don't, then you kind of have a sense. You don't know, but you have a sense of where they're at. Do they are they self-reflecting? Do they have more of a long-term memory? Are they remembering things correctly, etc.? You might think of Leo. That's an interesting one, because if they're being superficial and they're putting on this face, you can kind of compare it to someone who's a Leo. Do they have any of those traits? Libra. Think of Libra as learning to be in a relationship. What are their relationships like? Do they have relationships? But more specifically, they probably do, but what are their relationships like? You can move into Scorpio. Are they willing to go? Comes back to this idea of avoiding. Are they willing to have deeper conversations? Are they willing to face the issues? And you can go on and on and on through the zodiac. So hope this helps you. This is a little bit of venting on my side, talking about the dark side of Gemini.